This workshop is brought to you by Goulash Learning and Training. We are here in the library today. I will be presenting on the topic of technical writing. What is technical writing? Technical writing is specific instructions for how to use or how to perform a technical procedure. You might be familiar with the instructions and or manuals that you get with any sort of device. This is written by technical writers. In the market space today, there is a plethora of software engineering projects, and a lot of times they all need instructions for how to use that software. Right now in the field, I recently, for one of my clients, performed a survey of what technical writing did they like best in that call center and support center in helping people maintain their software and systems. People were moving towards liking knowledge bases, and a knowledge base is almost like an encyclopedia of answers. It's where you're searching or finding the answers. They liked those best, but they also liked standard operating procedures and user manuals. And those are kind of the antiquated methods, but still a lot of industries and a lot of sectors still use those. There are various ways to store your data and your instructions for your builds. A lot of companies are using SharePoint to store, or it could be some third-party network attached storage device, an external USB drive, or off in the island somewhere. But a lot of times there's some sort of secondary, if not tertiary, place to store your data. You can print things out in the old-fashioned way and have those in files, but you'll need some sort of backup. A lot of people are moving to put knowledge bases on SharePoint's wiki program, or also on Wikipedia's Media Wiki, which is an open source tool. There's been a little bit of movement in the instruction world. You know, technical writing is instruction. It's how to do something. And those are, there's some movement to do videos and instructional learning, quite possibly from a learning management system and online training in conjunction with those instructions. There's also a lot of movement of emails. A lot of times instructions, and you're in a build phase with your software company, that you have a lot of instructions going back and forth in emails to distribution lists. So sometimes people are now doing newsletters and or any sort of gathering of all of those email content to provide some sound instructions and step-by-step procedures to help people. I found in my learning that there are two different ways of doing documentation. There is sort of an informal way of doing documentation and then a formal way. The informal is like a cheat sheet. You know, it's something you might do, a one person might do, a one page, a one PDF, and that's sort of on the front lines. Something's basically someone's notes, and that's sort of informal. But this is your company's intellectual property. It's how your company manages your business, and it belongs to your company. So some people find putting a copyright on this material is important. But generally this would be on the more formal side. So that's the informal. So you have this informal documentation that your users and your company are doing. And then you have the formal. So you're going from informal to formal. On the formal side, you might have a formal document or manual that's 50 pages. This would have a table of contents, an editorial review section, captions and screenshots, and then, you know, your copyright. A technical writer or a management might be developing that document. So those are the two things that most of my clients have used. I came up with this working for a hospital healthcare company in Georgia, in Tennessee, and this idea is the documentation lifecycle. If you're an operations director or a manager, how are you managing all this writing and all these procedures? And I came up with this idea of 6 phases to a first-class document. And this is kind of, if you were the operations manager, what you would do to manage the life cycle of your writing that you're doing. Generally speaking, there's going to be an SME request. An SME is just a subject matter expert, basically the person who knows what's going on. Could be the programmer or engineer or somebody like that. After that, after the request for a document, then it would go to an editor. So that could be your technical writer or your manager. They would review that request, and then the manager or director would, in the next phase, would approve that document on the director level, and then there would be a sign-off. You would have ongoing changes and approvals, throughout the year, and then, an annual review at the end of the year. A lot of companies are growing and busting at the seams, and so they have to review through these policies, these procedures, and these manuals. Things change, IP addresses change, usernames change, server names change. You might get a new firewall or something different. And so you have to continually cycle back and relook at everything. So that's my idea of the 6 phases to a first-class document. There's also, in conjunction with technical writing, there's also instructional design. They call this ISD, instructional systems design. And I've learned a lot from some project managers working in Switzerland in a data center about white space. And this goes along with my best friend who's very good in psychology, of the psychology of reading and where your eyes travel on the space. So, good instructional design is to have good white space and a good user interface. It needs to be easy to read and quick, right? This is something fast. Clickable links are good. Screenshots are good. Anything like that that's going to give someone a quick, fast, easy read. This is not something that's 100 pages. I prefer to have a document control section. Some people you can use track changes or whatever tool you like in Microsoft. A document control section says, this manager did these edits, this person signed off on this date. And that way you have a record for litigation or liability if anything comes up in failure with your product, of who changed what and what was being said to your customer. One thing that I've gone back to really, really like is a PDF from a professor, Robert Horn in Stanford. And he wrote a paper in 1974 that I think still applies today. So I've told this to my friends over on 5th Street. And his idea was as taking this information map. And what is an information map? And it's basically how we learn and how we look at data as scientists and engineers and how we're recording that data. But if you would like to Google, or I can send you the link after this of that PDF from Stanford, from Professor Horn, he goes into further details about this idea of instructional design and information maps and how we're learning the data that we're developing out there in the science world. My best friend gave me this funny button that says RTFM, a good documentation is a terrible thing to waste. And it's really true, because if it's not intuitive, you might need a little bit of help and you might need some instruction. Some things to remember when you're working with technical writing. You want to be accurate, you want to be clear, and you want to be concise. I work with a lot of engineers and I'm completely head over heels for one engineer. But I will say this, ways to do that are to take a survey. Survey all of your engineers and get consensus. There's always going to be one person who's not going to agree. Take your time with your interviews and really spend time listening. Take your time to listen to the engineers. They know what is exact, and that is what you need to follow and what you need to be writing down. And you're also going to want to consider that your audience, the engineers might not be your only audience. It actually might be a customer service rep or a tech support rep or some sort of laborer or a person or team who's installing your product. So you want to make sure that you're kind of dumbing it down to their level. And it's not always going to be the engineer who's doing it. It might be someone who is on a different learning level. And there's nothing wrong with that. We love them all, that they're helping make things great. One other thing to remember is that infographics, when you're doing this, when you're teaching to all levels, are really good. This just means having a visual, having a picture, and then instructions around the picture. I have one here in my PowerPoint deck that has a bottle of Coca-Cola, and what happens to what happens 1 hour after drinking a can of Coke. And so it has a picture and then the procedures, all the way around. And I think for any sort of request for proposal or anything that you're trying to sell, it also adds a visual appeal to your product. So infographics, and I'll thank my friend Bridget Person at the state government office for discussing those points with me. Thanks for listening. This workshop was brought to you by Goulash Learning and Training, and I am Caroline.